From the world of politics to the world of business, this is Balance of Power. Live from Washington, D.C.
From Bloomberg's Washington, D.C. studios to our TV and radio audiences worldwide, welcome to Balance of Power. Alongside Kaylee Lyons, I'm Joe Matthew.
FDIC Chair Martin Gruenberg says he's stepping down after reports of a toxic culture at the regulator led to calls for his resignation. We'll get reaction from House Majority Whip and Financial Services Committee member Congressman Tom Emmer, and also ask him about key crypto legislation coming up for a vote this week.
The sudden death of Iran's president in a helicopter crash over the weekend, raising questions about the future of the country and the region amid ongoing war between Israel and Hamas. We'll speak today with Holly Dagres of the Atlantic Council.
And Trump's criminal hush money trial winding down in New York as the prosecution rests its case and the defense is getting set to wrap things up tomorrow. We'll get the latest reaction from our political panel. So no shortage of drama in the courtroom in New York. Once again today, Joe, it does seem we are reaching the end stages here, though the judge said this week is not going to be closing arguments. It will be a week from tomorrow that the defense and prosecution get their final words in.
Even with an important headline, the prosecution rests its case. And you're right, Kaylee, it appears we are going to have to wait until after the holiday weekend for deliberations to begin and a verdict to be read in this trial. We did hear from Donald Trump earlier today on his way back into another week in court. Here he is.
You have a lawyer. You pay him a legal expense, and it's covered in the book as legal expense. I had nothing to do with it. The bookkeeper put it down as a legal expense. This is why I'm here, because we called it a legal expense.
For more, we're joined now by Bloomberg's Saleha Mohsen, a senior Washington correspondent for us. So, Saleha, obviously we have seen weeks now of Donald Trump in court, but it does seem we are getting to the end stages. The prosecution certainly is going to call no more witnesses. This is the make or break moment for not just Donald Trump, the criminal potentially charged with crimes, but Donald Trump, the presidential candidate.
Yeah, an ex-president. He's
an ex-president.
Yeah, he was president, and he wants to be president again. And in the midst of all of that, he's campaigning, and he's also going to be waiting for a verdict. Now, so far, we hear that closing arguments are a week from tomorrow, meaning the very earliest we could get a verdict would be a week from Wednesday, unless that judicial calendar slips. There's never been so many eyes on that calendar, I don't think. We're wondering from around the world, you know, you could have anything from peace and quiet, no big deal. It was what we expected, to protests.
Sure. All the while, donors are not moving away from Donald Trump. They're moving toward him. This is a true split screen, almost split reality, because so far this trial has not done anything to dent his campaign, maybe the opposite.
It has not done anything to dent his campaign, but look at the key demographic that this week we see President Joe Biden trying to bring in. He's trying to bring in black voters, which has been a mainstay for the Democratic, that demographic has been a mainstay for the party, for the Democratic Party. But Trump is making some inroads. So not only is he keeping his donors amidst this trial, but also while he is continuing his often bombastic rhetoric and sort of twisting where we are with race relations, he's winning support from that demographic.
Amazing. President Biden, meantime, spoke about the war in Gaza and an important stop at Morehouse College yesterday as we keep our eyes on both campaigns. Here's what he had to say.
It's a humanitarian crisis in Gaza. That's why I've called for an immediate ceasefire. An immediate ceasefire to stop the fighting. Bring the hostages home. And I've been working on a deal as we speak, working around the clock to lead an international effort to get more aid into Gaza, rebuild Gaza. I'm also working around the clock for more than just one ceasefire. I'm working to bring the region together, working to build a lasting, durable peace.
Let's bring in Bloomberg's Dan Flatley with an eye on foreign policy here. These are two candidates. We started with Donald Trump, Dan, on to Joe Biden, each with their own challenges at the moment, and Israel remains a big one for the sitting president. There were concerns about protests at the college commencement address over the weekend, and we did see a few students turn their back to the president. The message that he's delivering, though, we have to acknowledge, comes with a very pro-Israel policy that technically hasn't changed despite his recent decision to withhold some weapons. What's the big picture here?
Yeah, no doubt the Biden administration is trying to thread a very narrow, thread the needle through a very thin, very narrow opening here. Yeah. Essentially trying to continue the support that they have voiced for Israel and for the government there, while also trying to speak to some of the voters here, some of the voters that Saleha was talking about earlier that are a key part of the Democratic coalition. And in order to do that, you have to speak directly to those folks, but also continue the support as you have going forward. So it's a very difficult thing to do.
Well, certainly we know there is a lot of difficulty in the Middle East right now, and potentially it was complicated further this weekend by the death of the Iranian President Ebrahim Raisi in a helicopter crash. We heard more about this from the Defense Secretary Lloyd Austin earlier today.
Regarding the death of Iran's president in the very unfortunate helicopter crash, we continue to monitor the situation, but we don't have any insights into the cause of the accident at this point. And certainly I know the Iranians are investigating or will investigate, and so we'll see what the outcome is once their investigation is complete.
So, Dan, obviously we still have questions about what exactly happened here that led to the death, not just of the president, but also the foreign minister. But we also have questions about what realistically this changes, both inside Iran and outside of it.
Yeah, I think, this is not happening in a vacuum, obviously. And I think from, speaking to folks today, what we understand is that it won't have any meaningful changes in the near term on the Iranian government or the Iranian government's posture toward its proxy forces in the Middle East, which are involved in conflicts on a number of fronts. But it will potentially have an impact on the country's aspirations moving forward when it comes to its nuclear weapons program. The hold of the supreme leader, the hold that he has on power, and potentially could complicate things in the region. We also know that the king in Saudi Arabia has gone in for some procedures. So there's sort of a balance of power that is ever shifting in the region, even as the U.S. tries to work its will on the Israel-Gaza war. And so all of these things will need to be taken into account by the administration as it tries to kind of craft a policy ahead of an election where this could be a foreign policy issue that has a lot of resonance for American voters.
Well, and on the Israel-Gaza war, we, of course, got news today that a prosecutor with the International Criminal Court has requested arrest warrants go out for a number of Hamas officials and Israeli officials, including Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu. So that's a complicating factor as well. Bloomberg's Dan Flatley, thank you so much for joining us around the table. Now, still coming up, Congressman Tom Emmer of Minnesota, the House Majority Whip, will be here for a conversation on crypto legislation and some reaction to that news that the FDIC Chair Martin Gruenberg is going to step down. That's next on Balance of Power on Bloomberg TV and radio. Welcome back to Balance of Power on Bloomberg TV and radio. FDIC Chair Martin Gruenberg says he's stepping down after findings of a toxic work environment put the regulator at the center of a heated political fight that today led the Democratic chair of the Senate Banking Committee, Sherrod Brown, to call for his resignation. And in a statement, Gruenberg said in part, "In light of recent events, I am prepared to step down from my responsibilities once a successor is confirmed." Joining us now for reaction is Congressman Tom Emmer. He is the House Majority Whip and a member of the House Financial Services Committee. He is joining us live from Capitol Hill. Congressman, thank you so much for joining here at Bloomberg. Obviously, a number of members of both the House and the Senate had called for this to happen. Now that he says he will indeed step down once a successor is confirmed, who should that successor be?
Well, it's before we even get there. Classic Marty Gruenberg. Yeah, I'm going to step down, but not until. Marty Gruenberg should leave the building now. He should have resigned weeks ago, perhaps years ago, based on the hundreds of pages of report that showed this toxic work environment with sexual harassment and all kinds of awful things. with the employees. And yet here he goes again. Hey, I'm going to resign. I'm prepared to do that, but not until we have a successor. Well, guess what? Kayleigh, we've got 6 months left, roughly 6 or 7 months left. Marty Gruenberg needs to go yesterday. So he should resign and get out of there. I'm sure there are other capable people, by the way, that are there that can pick up the pieces and continue to run the FDIC in a much better fashion than Mr. Gruenberg did.
We spoke last week, Congressman, with Senator Joni Ernst of Iowa, who's up with legislation, along with her colleague from New York, Kirsten Gillibrand, to essentially take away taxpayer-funded pensions from sex criminals, people who are found guilty of sexual harassment or so forth. Do you think that Mr. Gruenberg should lose his pension as well as his job?
Well, I'm not going to go there because you do have a court of law. You do have people that are allowed to confront their accusers. The report is pretty damning, though. I will say, Joe, and I think before I'm going to take that step, you referred to sexual harassment. No, I think that bill applies to if you have been criminally charged and convicted. That's a different animal. But at this point, that hasn't happened. He needs to resign, Joe. He needed to go long ago, and he should be stepping out now.
Well, Congressman, I guess we'll see what the future of that bill is in the Senate. Meantime, there are a few bills that have our attention in the House this week that will be coming up for a vote related to crypto, one of them being your bill that focuses on CBDCs, central bank digital currencies, another, the Fit for the 21st Century Act, which is the market structure bill delineating what is the regulatory authority that the CFTC should have versus the SEC. Congressman, I know this is legislation you've been pushing, but it is also your job to count the votes. Are both of these bills going to pass on the House floor?
Yes, they are.
And you have confidence that the Senate will pass them in return?
Well, I'm going to leave that to the Senate. We have some champions over there who understand that we are in the digital age, that it's time to bring our financial system into the 21st century. What the FIT bill, as it's referred to, the market structure bill, does is essentially start to lay out those ground rules, the playing field, so that people who innovate in the digital space, people who are creating the next great internet, are able to do that here in this country. Up till now, there has been no clarity, and frankly, I wasn't in favor of it to begin with till they added my Securities Clarity Act, which literally allows a centralized program to decentralize over time and then be treated differently. So it's really important that we have this in place in order to keep these innovators and entrepreneurs right here in this country.
Well, it's interesting, Congressman, because we keep hearing the stores closed. Now that we've gotten through the most recent bout of legislation dealing with Ukraine funding, Israel and so forth, we, I guess, could see some messaging bills go through, maybe an extension of the Farm Bill. But I wonder if you're working on something bigger in your head. The idea that we're going to see a vote on stablecoin. Could we see a combined bill like what was being discussed with the FAA, for instance, where stablecoins, safe banking, executive clawbacks are all put into one vehicle to garner more support throughout the body?
That might be something towards the end of the year, Joe. But I think right now you're talking about just two very specific pieces of legislation. One is creating a framework so that entrepreneurs and innovators, those who want to invest in great projects, do it right here in this country so we don't ever experience this issue that we had with someone who's outside of the reach of the United States oversight. And then we've also got a central bank digital currency bill on the floor, which literally says the federal government could create one, but they're going to have to get authorization from Congress, and it's going to have to emulate cash, which simply means that any digital currency issued by the government must be open, permissionless, and private. It can't be used like the Chinese are using the digital yuan, which is basically a surveillance tool where they're building social scores on their citizens based on their purchases and their behavior. We can't have that in this country. That's un-American. We need a digital currency that actually is consistent with American values.
Although, Congressman, we have heard repeatedly from the Fed Chair Jay Powell, who has reiterated time and again that they are nowhere close to actually launching or thinking about launching a central bank digital currency in the U.S. Something, though, that is much closer, of course, is the upcoming election. And former President Trump, the presumptive Republican nominee, was actually in your home state of Minnesota this past weekend, and he suggested he might be able to win there. Just take a listen, if you will.
Hello, Minnesota. This is a great state. We're going to win this state. 1952. Can you imagine? I thought we won it in 2016. I know we won it in 2020.
So, Congressman, he didn't win in Minnesota in 2020. He lost by 7 points to Joe Biden, but it's your state. Could it actually be red this time around, and why?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, President Trump is leading across the country. I'm afraid that his political adversaries, well, I'm not afraid, I know that they have overreached on this. The persecution of Donald Trump. You've got regular Americans who are not partisan watching this, and it's not a matter of whether they like someone or dislike someone. They know fairness, and when they see someone not being treated fairly, look at the result. He just continues to climb in the polls. And in my home state, when it was Hillary Clinton back in 2016, Donald Trump came within less than 2 points, about 1.5 points, of beating Hillary Clinton in Minnesota, a place where a Republican presidential candidate has not won since 1972. And right now, Kayleigh, the polls that we know of show this basically as a statistical tie, a dead heat. And since the polls I've looked at typically oversample Democrats, it's very possible that he is leading right now in Minnesota. But we have a long way to go, and there's a lot of work yet to do.
Well, he paid a visit to your state, Congressman. When are you going to make tracks to New York to visit the former president at the courthouse?
Oh, listen, I support what's going on in terms of people who are supportive of the president, like I am, but it's just a matter of logistics. That's all it is. Time. I'm with you guys tonight because I'm in Washington, D.C.
Fair enough. Although the speaker himself was able to make a trip last week. Congressman, you wanted the speaker's job yourself before Mike Johnson got it. Are you still eyeing that in the future?
Actually, I didn't want it. That's why I didn't put my name in until it looked like everybody that wanted it was no longer going to be a viable candidate. As it turns out, we got a great speaker. He's doing a wonderful job. And you guys are right. He did manage to make that trek up to New York. But keep in mind, I'm the whip. My job is to make sure people are attending a session, that they are here so they can vote. And let's just say that we've had to do some gymnastics to make sure that works with people coming and going, whether it be to New York or somewhere else. So I got to set the example.
I've thought about this, Congressman, what you must go through as a whip. I mean, is to what extent is the House calendar at the mercy of what's going on in Lower Manhattan?
Oh, no, that's not the issue. Our calendar is working. But when you're voting and you're giving people times, you know, you can't count on the trains running on time. You can't count on the flights running on time. You don't know what the traffic's going to be like. And this isn't just about Manhattan. This is about all over the country. You know, I have members who come from the West Coast that they try to leave on the day of votes. And guess what? Mechanical problems, whatever the issue might be, and you have to deal with it. Our colleagues on the other side of the aisle have the exact same problem we do.
Yeah, that was a beautiful turn, Congressman. It's good to have you back, and I hope you win tonight. Tom Emmer, the Republican from Minnesota, we thank you for being with us here on Bloomberg. He's got a game to play. Coming up, Bloomberg's interview with Republican Senators Ted Cruz and Katie Britt on their bill to protect in vitro fertilization. We'll bring you part of that conversation next, only on Balance of Power on Bloomberg TV and radio. This is Balance of Power on Bloomberg TV and radio. I'm Joe Matthew alongside Kayleigh Lines in Washington. Earlier today, Bloomberg's Anne-Marie Hordern spoke with Senator Ted Cruz of Texas and Senator Katie Britt of Alabama, both in New York today, talking about their new bill focused on protecting IVF treatments on the federal level following the ruling by Alabama's Supreme Court earlier this year that banned the practice there, a ruling that was overridden by the legislature. Here's a piece of that conversation.
Unfortunately, we've seen a number of people try to fearmonger on this very issue. And so Ted and I came together, and we believe this effort should be bipartisan to make sure that every parent across the country who wants to bring life into this world and maybe struggling with infertility or others, but wants to use IVF to create the miracle of life, bring it into the world, has a certainty that that's going to be available to them. And so we're excited about it and believe that it's something we can move forward quickly.
Senator Cruz, then why wouldn't Republicans sign up for Senator Duckworth's bill earlier this year, which then actually would have protected what happened in Alabama?
Well, because that bill's a very different bill. That bill really seeks to backdoor in broader abortion legislation, which is where the Democrats are, but that's not IVF. Our bill is very simple and it's very focused, and it is designed to protect IVF. IVF is miraculous medical technology. It enables millions of parents to have children, to be moms, to be dads. 2% of live births in America right now today come from IVF. It's incredible. And both Katie and I agree that IVF is incredibly pro-family, that we should be standing and helping parents who want to raise kids. And what happened when the Alabama Supreme Court decision came out, there was a lot of confusion, there was a lot of fear, there was a lot of misunderstanding, and people did not want anything to threaten IVF. I agree with that. Katie agrees with that. And so we came together and said, let's draft a simple, straightforward federal bill that creates a federal right, that you as a parent have a right to have access to IVF. If you want to have a child and you need medical assistance to do so, that should be your right. This is a bill, I think, that should be overwhelmingly bipartisan. The Senate should pass this bill 100-0. We'll see if they do or not, but on the merits, that's what should happen.
Senator Duckworth's bill, though, talked about and clearly asserts that this is about, quote, assisted reproductive technology and insurers' ability to cover those procedures. So in that case, do you guys think you can get a bipartisan legislation? Why not just work with Senator Duckworth?
Well, it depends. The way the Duckworth bill is written, it's very broad. There's a reason that no Republicans supported it, because it was ostensibly about IVF, but when it was written to give the federal government authority over abortion, potentially to strike down laws governing abortion in states all across the country. And that, I get that's the Democrats' agenda. And unfortunately...
But why not have bipartisanship on both? Because overwhelmingly, Americans want IVF, but overwhelmingly, and you come from states that have very restrictive abortion policies, even majority of Republicans think abortion should be able to happen, rape, incest, and life of the mother. That's not true of both your states.
Well, listen, abortion is an issue that there are sharp disagreements. People of good faith and good morals disagree. And it's why the Supreme Court has said this is a question for the states.
You can watch that full interview with Senators Ted Cruz and Katie Britt online and on the terminal. This is Balance of Power on Bloomberg TV and radio.
We have been quite clear that Ebrahim Raisi was a brutal participant in the repression of the Iranian people for nearly 4 decades. Some of the worst human rights abuses occurred during his tenure as president, especially the human rights abuses against the women and girls of Iran. That said, we regret any loss of life. We don't want to see anyone die in a helicopter crash. But that doesn't change the reality of his record, both as a judge and as the president of Iran, the fact that he has blood on his hands.
State Department spokesman Matthew Miller earlier today answering a question about the U.S. response to the death of Iran's President Raisi, expressing official condolences. Raisi's death now leaves Iran's supreme leader's succession in question amid heightened conflicts in the Middle East. And we have a lot to talk about with Holly Dagres, Atlantic Council Middle East Program Senior Fellow and Editor for MENASource and IranSource. It's great to see you at the table. We don't want to see anyone die in a helicopter crash, is the response essentially from the U.S. government today. What do you make of this subdued reaction, and what does it say about not just our relationship, but any potential or lack of change in policy that this might bring?
Well, Iran policy in the United States has been problematic for some time because we actually don't have an Iran policy, believe it or not. We've had 3 big events: the war in Ukraine, the Women Life Freedom Uprising, and the October 7th attack that Iran has been involved in. And we haven't seen any change in U.S. policy. And, we just heard that statement. And a lot of Iranians are saying, well, why are you even giving any empathy for this regime that has blood on its hands and has done so much to its people? We want this regime gone. And that's been a lot of the reaction on social media.
Okay, so to that point, we're not seeing changes in U.S. policy. Are we about to start seeing changes in Iranian policy now that he has died? Or is it status quo with someone else?
Well, I think that's an important point. I think the key here is that domestic and foreign policy decisions are made by the Supreme Leader, Ayatollah Ali Khamenei, the Supreme Leader. And with Ebrahim Raisi gone, there's still going to be continuity because the main decision maker is still alive, and that's Khamenei himself. So I wouldn't expect any changes.
That's the point here, right? When you don't see that much of a reaction, it's an indication of status quo. Not that much is likely to change here. We already likely know who will be replacing him when elections are held in 50 days or so forth. But Raisi had a special relationship with Saudi Arabia. It's something that we were talking about earlier. And I wonder if this has any impact on the potential for normalizing relations with Saudi Arabia and Israel, something that seemed to be at hand.
Well, I think, again, this goes back to the big picture. The president of the Islamic Republic is the face. He's the head of state that travels, that does all the meetings and does all the foreign policy decisions, along with the foreign minister, who also just died in the helicopter crash. But at the end of the day, it's the Supreme Leader, the Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps, that are making these decisions. So you're going to still see that these policies with Saudi Arabia, this normalization that's happened in the past year, after China had brokered this deal between Iran and Saudi Arabia. So you're not really going to see much changes. I think what's key here to note about Raisi himself is that he was a top contender for the role of Supreme Leader. So what you might see is this change in the succession line. Who's going to be next? This is an individual that was molded by the Supreme Leader himself. He was a loyal servant to the Supreme Leader. And so who will be in line next? And that's really the question for some of us analysts.
Do you have any ideas as to who that may be?
Well, that circle has gotten much smaller now after yesterday's events. Another candidate that some people have floated around is Moshtaba Khamenei, the son of the Supreme Leader, who works in the shadows. But that would mean that the Islamic Republic would be a hereditary model, and that would make it no different than the monarchy that had been overthrown in 1979.
What type of reaction should we expect to hear, if any, from the people of Iran? Could this draw protests as we work our way towards an election?
Well, I think it's noteworthy that Iranians were actually celebrating this news. There were a lot of memes on social media that were highlighting this. Everything from hoping that wild animals would actually maul to death or kill the president or foreign minister. I know that's very morbid, but I think that should just highlight how angry and discontent they are with the Islamic Republic. We've also seen people cheering and dancing and posting these videos online. It's really hard to say, but I think this was a headache that the Islamic Republic did not want. They just had recent parliamentary elections that had the lowest turnout in the country's history. So I think that it's going to be a somewhat of a rough ride for them that they would like not to happen.
Well, especially because it's one thing to consider how rough the ride may be domestically, but also considering the neighborhood isn't exactly riding easy right now, as you've seen spill out into a way that we have not actually really seen in recent years in public in terms of actual assaults. Iran going after Israel, Israel going after Iran. A lot of activities in terms of the proxies, not just Hamas, but Hezbollah and obviously the Houthis in the Red Sea. What changes about all of that activity, if anything?
I mean, if I had a crystal ball, I would say that they'd like to keep it as drama-free as possible, but there's also the possibility, as some analysts were saying, of a wag the dog scenario, like keeping things distracted so that things are calmer on the domestic front. But from what we're seeing is that they're going to be focusing on how to make this presidential election as drama-free as possible, making sure that there's the right contender and that that situation on the ground with the populace that's very discontent with the regime is kept at ease.
There were initial questions, as anyone would expect, about potential Israeli involvement in the downing of that helicopter. Are you impressed in this age of misinformation and 24-hour news cycle that was brought to an end as quickly as it was? What do you think about that?
Well, I think that it was not surprising at all to hear that Israel intelligence agency Mossad would be blamed, especially you would think that that would be something common with the Islamic Republic, who likes to blame the United States and the West, and by extension Israel, for everything that goes wrong in their country. But I think the reality is that there were two things at play. First was that the helicopter was very old. Because of sanctions, the Islamic Republic has not been able to replace the parts on some of these old helicopters. But more importantly, they were flying in dense fog. So one wonders, well, who made that decision to let the president and foreign minister fly in such adverse weather conditions? So I'd be curious to see what they're going to do about that.
Yeah, certainly we still have a lot of details left to learn in that regard, I'm sure. Just finally, as we take kind of the wider view here of ultimately if it is going to be largely status quo, prior to his death, we were talking about a time where the U.S. and Iran clearly are not in the best area in their relationship. If a new president comes in, knowing that Ayatollah ultimately will still be in charge, it will still be the supreme leader who has the end say in everything, does this actually change the calculation of, say, a return to some kind of nuclear, not deal like we saw in prior administrations, but some kind of monitoring, these other kind of wider international efforts that had been underway in the past?
Well, I think the key here is that Khamenei is thinking about succession. He wants a relatively young and pious government. He wants it to be consolidation of power, and that's been a more hardline stance. And so a deal any sort is not realistic at all, because they've recognized that a deal with the United States means that a possible withdrawal. And with a U.S. election coming up, that's not a gamble they're willing to take. And they've also been leaning towards Russia and China. So I think that whatever relationship they were hoping to have with the West during the years of the JCPOA won't be able to coexist anymore, because they saw what happens when they do.
All right, Holly Dagres, great to have you on the show tonight. Thank you so much joining us from the Atlantic Council. Now, still ahead, the Senate sets up another vote on border security for later this week. We'll have more with our political panel next on Balance of Power on Bloomberg TV and radio.
We are in the digital age, that it's time to bring our financial system into the 21st century. What the FIT bill, as it's referred to, the market structure bill, does is essentially start to lay out those ground rules, the playing field, so that people who innovate in the digital space, people who are creating the next great internet, are able to do that here in this country.
That was Republican Congressman Tom Emmer of Minnesota, the House Majority Whip, on with us just moments ago here on Balance of Power. And joining us now with more is our political panel, Lester Munson, BGR Group Principal and Republican Strategist, alongside Jeanne Zaino, Iona University Political Science Professor and Senior Democracy Fellow with the Center for the Study of the Presidency and Congress. Great to have both of you here. Lester, we're getting some pretty important votes in the House this week on crypto legislation. And obviously, this is something we pay a lot of attention to here at Bloomberg. I used to host the Bloomberg Crypto Show, so I pay close attention. There's a question as to how large the constituency in terms of voters who care about crypto actually is. But there is a lot of money in crypto, and it's going after some pretty vulnerable candidates like the Democratic Senator from Ohio, Sherrod Brown. Can you be a Democrat and vote against crypto right now, or will it come back to bite you when there's money in the game?
It's a great question. This is a serious legislative effort to deal with a brand new market that is, as we know, as you probably know better than anyone, subject to a ton of volatility and a lot of misleading efforts. And so good for Congress for doing this. I hope the Democrats, even the vulnerable ones, can kind of come around and be in the right place on this issue. It seems like a very sensible thing to me.
Well, we've seen, Jeanne, and we've talked about it, this Congress try to get its arms around social media. Most recently, what to do with TikTok was a big question. But frequently, AI is the new example. These conversations elude a lot of lawmakers. Do you see this actually seeing the light of day? We're talking about votes here. Tom Emmer says he's got the numbers to pass it. Do you believe him?
You know, I believe Tom Emmer. I don't know if we are going to see it pass this year. It very well could. But, you know, as you look more broadly, there has been a lot of talk about crypto on Capitol Hill. And to Kayleigh's point, a lot of money. I mean, there are 3 super PACs planning to spend almost $80 million in the 24 cycle that are backed by crypto. So I think the important thing for Americans is both obviously the legislation and the regulation, but also watch where this money is going. You know, you look at the repeal of SAB and you see Democrats joined a lot of Republicans on that. So the money is speaking. It is speaking big. It has been for several election cycles. And of course, it's happening in terms of a conversation where it's not always closely watched by most of us because it's happening on Capitol Hill during a busy election season. So it's a really important conversation where the money is going just from a campaign perspective.
Well, certainly we'll be looking to see how much is spent in the state of Ohio as you have a pro-crypto Republican candidate in Bernie Moreno up against the aforementioned Sherrod Brown. But also vulnerable Democrats like him, Jeanne, could have an opportunity to at least cast a vote in favor of something that could help them, and that is border security measure that the Democratic leader, the Senate Majority Leader, Chuck Schumer, says he's going to put up for a vote in the Senate this week, that bipartisan deal that died a very quick death months ago. Is this about anything other than making sure those vulnerable Democrats get to be on the record trying to do something about the border?
It's really not. You know, I was going to say crypto is back from the dead, but you're right. Immigration reform is suddenly back from the dead. And it is really about the show of, you know, getting people like Sherrod Brown, like John Tester. You know, you can go through the list of the 5 vulnerable Democrats, getting them on the record. It's not going to pass. We know not only Republicans oppose it, but we also have Democrats like Padilla, Menendez, and of course some progressives. So this really is, you know, Chuck Schumer reading the polls, looking at these states and saying, my guys are vulnerable. If I'm going to stay majority leader, I got to get them on the record and try to mitigate the disaster on immigration that the Democrats have felt for some time in the polls now.
We see this strategy employed on both sides. Force a bill to the floor to force people to put their name on it up or down so we can make campaign ads. Do voters pay attention to stuff that way? With all the time and energy that we spend putting bills on the floor here, knowing they will never become law, does it actually work on the electoral side? Did the Republicans repeal Obamacare when they voted to do it 4,800 times in the House of Representatives in the last few years? No, this is purely for show. Frankly, I think it shows Senator Schumer's got a weak hand that he's got to go back to this legislation, which not only didn't pass a filibuster, it didn't even get a majority of votes when it came time to see if it was eligible for floor consideration. This is a pretty weak effort, in my opinion, on his part. He should be more constructively engaged.
So open up completely new negotiations with the White House, even though Donald Trump could potentially say, well, no, I still don't want you to pass anything on the border?
Well, if there's not enough energy there to do a border bill, do something else. Why not have a serious effort on the crypto side? The Senate's probably going to be what blocks the crypto bill. Why not engage in real public policy instead of politics? I know it's the silly season and we're all focused on the election in November, but I think these kinds of things don't really matter at the end of the day. Why not try a serious effort at legislating? That's what House Republicans are doing, amazingly. Senate Democrats should do the same. Even though they've got their share of messaging bills, obviously. Well, they'd tell you to put H.R. 2 on the floor, which didn't get a single Democratic vote. Well, it's going around. Isn't it? It might be the beginning of a negotiation. Yeah. All right. Lester, thank you. And Jeanne, Zaino, our panel stays with us. Coming up, President Biden stepping up his efforts to appeal to black voters. We'll be back with our panel to see how that's going following his address to Morehouse College over the weekend. This is Balance of Power, Bloomberg TV and radio.
You know and I know. We all bleed the same color. In America, we're all created equal. Extremists close the doors of opportunity. Strike down affirmative action. Attack the values of diversity, equality, and inclusion.
President Biden Sunday giving his commencement address at Morehouse College in Atlanta. As we reassemble our political panel for their take, Republican strategist Lester Munson is with us, principal at BGR Group, along with Democratic strategist Jeanne Zaino, Iona University political science professor, and now as well senior democracy fellow with the Center for the Study of the Presidency and Congress. Jeanne, this has been clearly identified as a deficit for Joe Biden. There were a lot of folks who thought that as he was appealing to a very important constituency on Sunday, that he would be beset by protests, pro-Palestinian protests at Morehouse. He was not. There were roughly a half dozen folks who turned their backs. About 5 students, I believe, and 1 educator turned their backs on the president while he was speaking. Was this a success for him?
It was. And can we just say, give credit to these students and faculty at Morehouse? Those who protested did so, like Martin Luther King, who graduated from Morehouse, taught them. They did so peacefully. They did so respectfully. They did so collegially. Even the speaker, there was an amazing young man who spoke. He said his view on the war in Gaza, it's not one shared by the president, and he said it in a beautifully thoughtful way. So I give a lot of credit to Morehouse and their students. I think the president did a very good job. I don't know that one address is enough, but the White House, or the campaign, I should say, has invested a lot of time this last week, and going forward, they're going to have to continue both with media and their events in terms of trying to reach out to young African Americans and African Americans overall, because Democrats can't win without the African American vote. And Joe Biden in particular also needs the young vote. And so those two things coupled together make what happened this weekend at Morehouse important, but certainly not enough.
Well, Lester, it raises the question of whether the policy stance or the messaging that is going to bring those voters back into the fold really is about the ongoing war between Israel and Hamas in Gaza, or if it's something just as simple as the economy and he needs to sell it better.
Yeah, I suspect he's not going to make up the deficit he has in the black vote by talking about the Middle East. And frankly, I don't think he's going to make up the deficit he has with most Americans by talking about the Middle East. He does need to address the economy. That's the thing that people care about. It would help him if he did have a win in the foreign policy front, whether it's with the Houthis in Gaza by pushing for a peace accord, or by having Ukraine do well against the Russian invasion in the next few months. Mm-hmm. He doesn't need a foreign policy win, but he also needs to be talking about things Americans care about. I actually thought he gave a nice speech. He didn't go too far. Mm-hmm. And he's doing the right things if he wants to get back into this race and make it more competitive than it is right now.
Donald Trump was also out and about, a couple speeches, a couple rallies over the weekend, including one before the NRA. He had a couple of issues at these events that might have made news for a different candidate. In this case, the former president took a very long pause during his address to the NRA. Take a listen.
Together they help make America into the single greatest nation in the history of the world.
That music was played live by the campaign as part of the rally. The president went on for more than 30 seconds without speaking. Lester, why would that be a lead story for Joe Biden and it's not for Donald Trump?
I think Donald Trump may think he's a DJ. He's like, Donnie J. Trump or something. He's if you go to Mar-a-Lago, he's the one controlling the soundtrack.
That's what you're chalking this up to. He was listening to music.
He thinks that he's got something going on with that music, and it's building up the drama of his remarks.
He almost lost his footing at the podium in a different speech as well. Yeah. That would have been a thing for Joe Biden, too.
That would have been a thing. I don't think Joe Biden's out there trying to be a DJ. I think this is Donald Trump maybe making an entertainment faux pas.
Okay. Well, he also said over the weekend, Jeanne, though, that maybe he'd serve not just 2 terms, but 3. And there's a question as to whether or not that was alluding to the fact that he stands by his belief that he won in 2020, even though he didn't. And we tend to just write these things off. Is that really what's happening with all of these different instances?
It is. And, I want to just go back to what he was doing down there. He was accepting the endorsement of the NRA in Texas, where we all saw in Uvalde the horror of the absence of gun regulation in this country. And he was promising that with that endorsement, I'll roll back all the gun regulation or the minimal steps we've taken under the Biden administration, reminiscent of his promise to the billionaires, to the oil executives, give me $1 billion and I'll roll back the environmental regulations. So I think that's what we should be talking about. He says what he is going to do. And when you listen to it, it is pretty astonishing, or at least it should be.
All right, Jeanne, Zaino, and Lester Munson, our wonderful political panel this evening. Thank you so much. And of course, for more coverage, check out the Washington Edition newsletter on the terminal and online.
See you back here tomorrow with a lot more to talk about on Balance of Power on Bloomberg TV and radio.